Before I discontinued my official Andre's artist profiles, this was always one I intended to do, and one of the reasons why I started doing the more irregular special artist tributes. And, of course, we all know who this is. He's turning 64 today. I did Steve Winwood yesterday. And here's the other Stevie with a W at the end. Mr. Steveland Morris, or Steveland Judkins, but we all know him as Little or just Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder, he is one of the major reasons why I love music, and why music is a major guiding post in just about everything I do. He's why I see rhythm and melody as a huge part of life in general. Everything I do. I see Stevie Wonder, as I think Kenneth Babyface Edmonds said, as kind of like a one-man Beatles. You know, blind from birth, born in Saginaw, Michigan, dirt poor, went to the Michigan School for the Blind, got signed to Motown, graduated, and became a musical genius. And he created sounds musically, whole new ways of producing sound. And he was a man who balanced soulfulness and eclecticism just perfectly. And his songs have become iconic. Like I said, like a one-man Beatles. But Stevie Wonder's in a class by himself. He really is. I have so many recordings by him, and there's still some from his early years especially that I'm missing, that I actually separated them out into 4 separate parts like this, covering the 60s, 70s, 80s, and after that, because Stevie Wonder is one of these people of recent years who's become a bit of a self-critic and hasn't released albums very consistently. Anyway, another Grail CD release I get at the old defunct Borders Books and Music. His first release, The Jazz Soul of Little Stevie. An all-instrumental album that very much sounds like Ray Charles of the time. They were trying to make him into a little Ray Charles on this album. Clarence Paul, who didn't generally produce for Motown, produced the original version of Fingertips here. A kind of a Latin song called Manhattan at 6. A bluesy tune called Paulsby. And a song called Wondering, which is a little more of a traditional Motown song. But in 1963, Motown was a little more diverse than it would later become. The Motown sound wasn't quite, hadn't quite found itself. The next album includes Stevie's first hit, a live version of Fingertips. This is essentially a live document in the studio of his. He actually kind of started you could say, the MTV Unplugged thing with this, live in the studio. He did a version of Ray Charles's Hallelujah, I Love Her So. His singing voice was a very hollow, high alto, kind of like Mary Wells at this point. Even Berry Gordy said he wasn't that fond of his singing voice, but you could hear expressiveness there, and the kid was a dynamo on instruments, I mean, he's Stevie Wonder. The next album, Stevie is extremely embarrassed by. It's Stevie Wonder singing, you could say, easy listening covers of Johnny Mercer songs, and with a song in My Heart from 1963. His voice was starting to change during the production of this album. Songs like Put on a Happy Face and On the Sunny Side of the Street and Get Happy by Harold Arlen are not the kind of thing you want to have to be interpreting when your voice is changing. But I like it, as odd as it is, I like it. A musical oddity for a genius like Stevie Wonder, but a long, important path on the road. I recently replaced my copy of the For Once in My Life album with this twofer, which includes Uptight. Actually, one of my favorite Stevie Wonder albums, and the first with his, officially changed voice. Except Contract on Love, which I think was recorded quite a bit earlier. But these are both fantastic albums. Especially You Met Your Match and Shooby Dooby Doo Da Day on this one from 68. He really started integrating the clavinet into his music. Oh yeah, and The House Up on the Hill. And, these are both transitional albums, recorded several albums apart. This one transitioned him from a child star into a Motown hitmaker with Uptight and Ain't That Asking for Trouble. And this one transitioned him into what inevitably would become his 70s sound. Not a perfect sound, but just about as good as the late 80s Motown CDs in general. The next album I have is from 1966, Down to Earth. He had a hit on this album called A Place in the Sun, and Be Cool, Be Calm, and Keep Yourself Together, and Angel Baby, Don't You Ever Leave Me are very much in the Uptight vein. It's a similar kind of album. I don't know how I feel about him doing songs like 16 Tons or something like Bang Bang by Sonny and Cher. But the covers on this album work a lot better because of Stevie's more mature voice. And I love the song Sylvia, actually, is another great song on this album, I have to admit. One of my favorites, actually, by him from the 60s. This album, I Was Made to Love Her Aside, actually has a much more Ray Charles feeling again. I mean, they were kind of trying to get past that, and Stevie especially wanted to do that. About 16, 17 years old when this was made. But he does a song called Every Time I See You I Go Wild, which actually sounds a lot like the Supremes' You Keep Me Hanging On. Not a typical Stevie Wonder sound. All of these albums, by the way, are out of print domestically, but I got them. I'm not usually a greatest hits person, but at the time I was getting into Stevie Wonder, there were a lot of songs that could only be found on this album, like Hey Harmonica Man and Workout Stevie Workout, Greatest Hits, which originally came out in 1968. I'm always going to keep this album. I like the way these songs sound together, and there's some things I can't get here from anywhere else. Okay, flash forward. In 1968, Stevie Wonder did an instrumental album on Motown, where he actually did a version of Alfie, made famous by Dionne Warwick. Changed his name or altered it. Spelled this backwards. A little backwards. I'm asking here, Stevie Wonder. Again, kind of, you could say, light, Brazilian, easy listening type of music. You know, not usually what you'd associate with Stevie Wonder, more harmonica instrumentals. And this album, which ended off the 60s, caught him in a bit of a transition. My Sherry and More. Of course, it had this and Yester Me, Yester You, Yesterday. But he also does a song on this album called Hello Young Lovers, which is from The King and I, which he makes into an up-tempo romp like For Once in My Life. And does a great up-tempo version of Etta James's At Last. Another song I like on this album is You and Me, which has a great stomping soul feel. And that ends Stevie in the 60s. Now we move on to the 70s. Stevie Wonder's decade. Signed, Sealed, and Delivered, I'm Yours. I love this album. We Can Work It Out, his first big clavinet funky workout. We all know Signed, Sealed, and Delivered. You Can't Judge a Book by Its Cover, another great funky number. And one of my favorite Stevie Wonder compositions, I Can't Let My Heaven Walk Away, and I Gotta Have a Song. Both fantastic compositions. Kind of a closeout to his 60s sound. This album has been very elusive to get, and this is the first edition Motown record, Where I'm Coming From. This was the last album on his original record contract, his childhood contract, as it were. Stevie was really starting to get into his 70s sound here. Very funky and keyboard-oriented, Do Yourself a Favor. Look Around has an interesting mixture of gospel and Bach-like classical on it, the way he plays the keyboard on that, the clavinet. And Something Out of the Blue is just a beautiful song. I mean, no one writes a love song quite like Stevie Wonder, I have to say that. And Take Up a Course in Happiness, I think I heard he wrote it for Sammy Davis when he was on Motown. And Sunshine in Their Eyes, you know, is a long, socially conscious magnum opus, goes from up and down tempo. And of course there's If You Really Love Me, the big hit from this album. He married C. Rita Wright during the time of this, when this came out. And Never Dreamed You Would Leave in Summer was also another ballad hit for him. I Want to Talk to You is kind of a R&B bluesy number about the generation gap. Kind of a witty song. Where I'm Coming From, one of my favorites of Stevie's. Now, Music of My Mind. This really changed the game for Stevie. 1972. You know, Love Having You Around, Superwoman, I Love Every Little Thing About You, Happier Than the Morning. I mean, I don't need to go into this anymore. This is when he was, you know, making his breakthrough records. Then came Talking Book. You know, You Were the Sunshine of My Life, Superstition. He was getting into his real hit parade period here. I Believe When I Fall in Love It'll Be Forever is here. And so is Big Brother, another socially conscious song he wrote. And he recorded Looking for Another Pure Love with Jeff Beck and You've Got It Bad Girl. He's really getting into his classic period now. It's a remastered edition. Innervisions. Again, in his classic period. Stevie could do no wrong during these years. Visions, Living for the City, Golden Lady, Higher Ground, and my favorites. You know, Jesus, Children of America. I love the funkiness of that song, and Don't You Worry About a Thing. The real version, not the fake one. There was a couple of rip-off versions of this in the 70s. on budget compilations, but this is the real deal. I love that artwork. Fulfilling his first finale, Stevie Wonder had a car accident that almost clipped him and killed him, and he did this album. You know, Smile Please, Heaven is 10 zillion light years away. Bird of Beauty is a very special song with a personal story time in my family. You know, it's just a favorite of my mother's too. This album is probably too much for words to me. Now we get into Songs in the Key of Life. This double album, plus 45. I've heard it on 8-track, vinyl, you know. Have a Talk with God, Contusion, Pastime Paradise, Love's in Need of Love Today, Sir Duke, I Wish, Black Man. Amazing, amazing album. You know, one of those classic records. It actually was the only Stevie Wonder album to have a classic album series made on it. Now we get into the 80s. By this time, Stevie Wonder, at a time when he probably should have been focusing more on his electronic productions, which were coming into the boogie type sound, he was actually starting to get a lot more into live productions. And this is a great album. I really like his version of his old 60s song, which he did for Tammy Terrell, All I Do. Rocket Love is really nice, and even the mildly country-ish I Ain't Gonna Stand For It, and the reggae of Master Blaster, and Do Like You and Cash in Your Face, which are really funky, are good, bit live band. Happy Birthday is more indicative of what I would have thought he'd been doing during this period. Good album, but maybe a little behind the times in a lot of ways. My favorite album of his was this masterfully eclectic soundtrack, which included almost every strain of music you could ever imagine, called The Secret Life of Plants, and I've played it so much, it's in different parts all over the house, and I'm sorry it couldn't be included, but that's my favorite of his. The next one, I don't have the original Musicarium anymore, because it only had 3 songs I really didn't have. The Wonderful Do I Do, the ballad Ribbon in the Sky, and the funky front line about a Vietnam vet. There's The Woman in Red. Now, most of these songs are ballady duets with Dionne Warwick, but I love Don't Drive Drunk, Love Light and Flight, and The Woman in Red itself. I would have thought Stevie Wonder would have done songs more like that on Hotter Than July, but they might have come from that time, but he didn't. This next album was his first all-digital recording, recorded in 1983, but released in 85, In Square Circle. Never in Your Sun is an amazing song. So is Spiritual Walkers, about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and of course Part-Time Lover, which is an old song I guess he wrote for the Supremes, and Strangers on the Shore of Love, and the percussive It's Wrong Apartheid, and Go Home, which is one of my favorite songs on here, and Overjoyed, which he wrote for Secret Life of Plants but put here, and I Love You Too Much. There's some great music on here. A lot of up-tempo synthesizer music, you know, there was a little more in step with what Stevie Wonder commonly did, but the next album was Characters. This is one of my thoroughly favorite Stevie Wonder CDs ever. Galaxy Paradise, Skeletons, Get It with Michael Jackson, My Eyes Don't Cry, Free are some of his most amazing songs ever. All Stevie Wonder fans who don't think he was doing that much in the 80s, gotta check this record out. The next album was a soundtrack to the Spike Lee film, Jungle Fever. The film was very controversial, but Stevie's soundtrack was not. And this was sort of the introduction to the kind of New Jack swing sound. Queen in the Black, Each Other's Throats, If She Breaks Your Heart, Gotta Have You, and you know, Jungle Fever itself go perfectly with the New Jack swing funk era. On the other hand, he does a song about drug addiction called Chemical Love, which is more in the style of Characters, and Lighting Up the Candles, his tribute to Marvin Gaye. And of course, there is I Go Sailing, one of his most beautifully composed ballads. And I like the introduction Fun Day, too. Really nice melodic Stevie Wonder song. Now, 5 years later, he released this next album, which he was working on at the time, called Conversation Peace. He had a big hit associated with a food drive for the 1994 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade called Take the Time Out to Love Someone. But my favorite songs here are Cold Chill and Tomorrow Robins Will Sing. I think those are amazing songs. Really underrated album. Fell into a little bit of the trap of a lot of the songs trying to fill up the CD space. I love Sensuous Whisper too. Very jazzy hip-hop soul album. If you're a fan of Mary J. Blige, you'd like this side of Stevie too. Now this next album was a live album called Natural Wonder, recorded in Japan, and included a few new songs that he hadn't done before. One called Dancing to the Rhythm, which is one of my favorite Stevie songs, Mr. and Mrs. Little Ones, and the Stevie Ray Vaughan Blues, which is a fantastic song too, along with orchestral versions of some of his hits done live. Now, almost a decade later, he came out with his last album to date, A Time to Love. Frankly, the more I listen to this album, the more I love it. Sweet as Somebody I Know, Moon Blue, Passionate Raindrops, this title song, and So What the Fuss are among my favorite on this particular album from 2005. I hear he's working on a new album with David Foster, as well as a gospel album too. Hope he puts them out. Anyway, that's what I have for Stevie Wonder, everybody. And I wanted to pay tribute to him, his daughter Aisha, and his more recent children. And for all of you music lovers out there, I will see you all next time.